Rebecca, Dr. Brophy, our new CEO, has come up in her very nice striped vest. I think that may be our new uniform. She displays it well, I think. Would like to say good morning.
And as Jay has told us before, in order to be in his video, you have to stand between that pole and this way.
All right, good morning, everybody. It's so nice to meet you. And I know I've had a chance to chat with some of you this morning, and please stop by my office anytime. I'm right down below on the, well, I guess it depends on which way you're pointing, isn't it, on this ferry? To my starboard. But please stop by anytime if I haven't had a chance to meet with you. But I love this expression, tell me a story, and I know everyone's going to have their own things that they gravitate to as a docent. So I always love going with different people through the same vessels and hearing different people's passions about each one. But docents really do make the backbone of an organization like this. The volunteers around here is one of the reasons that I actually chose to take this position. I was so inspired by how many volunteers and docents are so engaged and for so long. So I hope to be here for a very long time myself, and I'm really excited to learn. I've been diligently reading my docent manual at night. Because someone was asking me all these questions about the Medea yesterday, and I was like, I don't know. But I'm going to know very soon. So I learned a lot about the star last night, and it's a wonderful manual. So what an amazing program, and just my deepest gratitude to all of you for bringing this place to life. And I can't wait to learn more from you. So good morning, and I will see you over the course of the training period. But thanks very much for the warm welcome.
I don't know if you've been informed, Dr. Brophy, that we are now videoing the docent presentations, and they're being posted on the docent page on our webpage. So if you ever want to review any of our presentations, are available, and that's also for all of you. The first 2 weeks are posted at the moment. Next week, the third week, and all the way through the session. So if you miss a session or you want to review a session, they're accessible on the docent webpage. Okay? One thing that we require for your graduation is that you shadow 3 guided tours, or 2-hour tours throughout the museum. And you have to have that signed off on the page that's in the welcome package. So be sure you print that out, and then when you go to shadow a tour, you bring it with you. The person doing the tour signs off, and then will complete the 3 tours. Without 3 tours, he can't graduate. Unfortunately, we're in our 4th week now, and we haven't had any tours come available. So that means we're almost halfway through. So what we're going to do in order to ensure your graduation is this Saturday, Bob Harrison, where are you at, Bob? Over here, will be here at 10 o'clock, and he will take all docent trainees and older people if they wish to come along and do a 2-hour tour of the museum. He will then sign off your tour requirement. And then on Sunday, Jim Gale, right there, will be here at noon and do the same thing. So each weekend between now and the end of the training session, I'm going to try and have 1 or 2 people come to the museum on the weekend and provide a tour that will qualify as one of your shadow tours. So that means no one will have an excuse at the end of the training that, oh, I didn't get my 3 in, okay? Because believe it or not, that's the #1 reason people aren't ready to graduate at the end of the training.
Do we need to sign up for that, or do we just show up?
Let us know so that they know, but if you just show up, you're not gonna be told no.
Yeah, let Bob or Rebecca or myself.
So here's one of the things. The tour starts at 10, right? So we go on a philosophy is 15 minutes early is on time. right? So if you're not here at 10 o'clock, the train has left the station, so please come at least a few minutes earlier than that. And where we're going to meet is actually here on the McKinney deck.
What's the name of this deck?
McKinney.
Thank you.
Sir,
Jim, I was going to give my mentee a 2-hour tour today about all the museum. So if anybody wants to go with us and walk around this way for that count too, because I was going to do that today for her. So if anybody wants to go today, I could do a tour.
you're gonna do a 2-hour formal tour and cover all the ships?
Do that today, I'm going to do it with her, yeah.
Okay.
So if anybody wants to go today.
Except you cannot do it for your mentee and get signed off because that's bias.
And it needs to be 3 different leaders.
Yeah.
Your 3 tours have to be
Same
3
person
different
can't give
leaders.
all 3 tours.
If anybody wants to get involved.
That might be considered somewhat redundant, Jim.
And make sure you bring the document to sign by your mentors here, okay? Have that with you
Yes.
so we
I
can
will
finish it off
send
at the
that
end.
out, make sure everyone has it. Is it in the,
It's in the welcome package,
very good, very good.
page 4, something like that. Okay, any other, yes,
Could I just very quickly second what Dr. Cassidy said, which is the reason for 3 different leaders for your shadow tours is not just to avoid repetition, but because this class and the training manual are giving you a fund of knowledge from which you can draw to tell a story, and we each have our own way of telling those stories. As Christina mentioned, people have different ways of presenting things, and having done a shadow tour with 3 different people just exposes you to the idea that everybody, all of the docents have their own way of presenting things, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind. You don't have to do something just exactly the way that your mentor does them. We all have our own ways of doing things.
you will never learn everything. And each one of us tells a slightly different story. And so we learn from each other constantly. And part of the fun of being a docent is always entertaining, interesting. Sarah?
What time did you say it was at then?
On Saturday, it will be 10 a.m. on the McKinney Day. Sunday, Jim and Gail, where are you?
She's over here.
It will be 12 o'clock on Sunday, and where do you want to meet?
Jim, where do you want to meet on Sunday?
We can meet here, up here at the same thing.
Same place. Okay. Senior docents, if any of you wish to volunteer to give tours on the weekends, send me an email so I can schedule you. I would like to schedule at least 2 tours per weekend for the next 5 weeks. Okay? Preferably with different people, but if not, then there are some people that are willing to carry the load. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Towards today, like around 1 o'clock following it starting.
Where are you starting?
Are you sorry, I started giving you up here on this
I think
Sorry,
what
Dave?
time,
What time, Bill?
Oh, when are you going to
well, there's
There's a 12 to 1 o'clock walkabout on the Star of India. Why don't you start your tour at the bottom of the gangway on the Star of India, because that way the people doing the walkabout will already be there. All right? Any further questions?
Question.
Yeah.
The city's parking change, does that apply to the permanent parking?
No,
It does not. The operating part is
we're
gonna stay.
still the same.
Good, okay.
Yeah. You can't after 3 hours, you can't renew your parking along Harbor Boulevard. But if you do a U-turn and cross the street, you can park there and pay the meter there, because they're different authorities. Welcome to San Diego.
Right.
All right.
Sunday across the street's free.
At the moment.
Yeah, across the street on
It's
Sunday.
about to change. It's about to
That's gonna
change.
change.
Yeah, that's right. Fourth District loves their money. I mean, the maintenance duties. All right, come on.
I got it, and again, he cuts me out of the video anyways. Believe me, he cuts me out of the video. I've watched. Good morning, family. It's a little warn, we are heading into some bad weather. Jim Davis has called storm watch from tomorrow to mid-Friday. So we're not expecting a lot of wind, but we are expecting a lot of water. So just, if you're on deck, bless you, and watch your footing. And then, you can always come into the Berkeley and do deck duty. It's a little dry. It's not any warmer, but it's a little dry. So a couple things. Ken Golden wants me to make sure that everyone knows if you would like to train or sail as a docent on either of Californian or San Salvador, you need to answer him, and then he can schedule you. He will be checking with me before he schedules you to make sure all of your paperwork and admin is in place. Okay, but he is the one who can do that. Then he calls me if he has a couple extras. I make sure there's room on the boat, and we'll schedule you. We have 2 less sailings every month now that the ships are only going out on Saturday. So just try and get yourself in a rotation as soon as you can. Okay?
Is Ken here?
He could not be here today.
His last email said there are 2 openings for March still available. So he sent out an email, we all should have received it. There are still a couple available.
And if you aren't getting those emails, send me one so I can give him your email address, because you may just not have it, so you can get on that rotation. We don't like it, but yes. Yeah. So please check your docent page, sdmaritime.org/docent. As they said, there are updates.
Get involved.
You don't have to do /get. We have this argument every year. Yes, we do. Just put sdmaritime.org/docent. It will redirect. You don't have to put in this whole long. I promise. I promise you every year. On there you will see the link to our YouTube page that will have the trainings that Jay has been doing for us. Thank you, Mr. Eager. And also you can see, although some things you can see on your logistics schedule, what you won't see are the general tours and other activities that are coming up. So there is an assignment schedule there. Take a peek, see what's coming up. We have we have San Diego Yacht Club opening day. Same day we have Day at the Docks. We are having Open House San Diego. We have a couple other things coming up. Any tour that is booked, fully booked, will be on there. The ones that are not fully booked, you'll see them in process, not confirmed, something like that. You're welcome to sign up for that if you like. I'm just letting you know it's not written in stone because they haven't given me any money yet. Okay, so it's not confirmed until I get some money. So, and remember that you yourselves can do tours any day. If you are here on deck, we call it Docents on Deck now. We gave it a cute name. If you are here and you want to give a tour to someone who has a ticket, please do. And if you're going to be here, how many are coming in the rest of the week even though it's raining? Besides Dennis and So these guys are going to be in. Come on down, pick their brain. Dennis is very good at picking up tours and carrying people off the boats. I don't know what happens to them after that, but.
3-hour tour.
Yeah, and for example, Mike Kay looked at the schedule last week and let me know a tour I hadn't announced yet that he could take it. It's 2 people. It's one of the Wednesday tours, but he's going to take it. Hopefully we'll get you a few more. That tour can be a shadow for at least one docent. We don't want to have more docents than guests. So. No, not this Wednesday. There's a Wednesday tour. March something. I forget. Yeah. So.
What about those tags? Ask me about a tour.
You want one?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll bring them up. You just, by the way, welcome back, Mr. Dabbs, and we hope you are healing them.
Hey, welcome back.
And my other question is there anyone here who will be coming in on weekends and who will be sailing that needs a parking pass? 1, 2, 3. For solar?
Oh, no, I got it.
Yeah, you got it. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I'll get those up here around Brooklyn. Okay. Any questions for me? Oh, if you are a trainee and you did not receive the mainsail hulls that we handed out last week in regards to Star of India, one of the most incredible comprehensive reviews of Star of India, you probably don't even need your docent number for that, but I didn't want to say that out loud. There are also copies of The Voyage of Cabrillo, and I have
I've also put out an older Mansell Hall that contains the Stead Ellis diaries. That's a really good read. You will not be tested on that. That's not tough. You won't be tested on anything that isn't in your manual. But that's a really good read. It's a much older Mansell Hall, so you won't have gotten that in your membership packet. And not all memberships are getting a printed copy. So trainees, please take it if you didn't get it. And if there's anyone here who wants a copy because you didn't get it earlier in your membership, let me know and I'll see if I can dig some out. I have a few that Kevin has given me.
Okay, I think that's everything, in which case, are you ready, David?
No.
No? Well, you're here, that's something.
So, unlike our other ships, the Star of India is our flagship, and you're the longest. The next 2 weeks is going to cover the Star of India. There's lots of information to know about that. So, just as a hint in terms of the exam, you might be a disproportionate number of questions relating to the star. So, warning.
Take the hint.
Am I there yet?
You're there, Dave.
All right, I haven't done this talk before, but thank you for those who have done it before and have put this slideshow together. I've made a couple of changes. There are people here who know much better than I how to build Euterpe. I've never done that, but I'm going to show you what I know about that. So, Carl, keep your comments till the end. Thank you very much. So any good story will tell you who, what, when, where, and why. I'm going to also add a little bit of how. So we can talk about the construction of the ship and her first 6 voyages for which she was built. Biggest critique just left. As we know her today, Star of India did not have that name. She was built as Euterpe. So let's see if I can figure out this technological stuff here. So why was the ship built? Well, she's a cargo carrier, and like any truck on the road today, you need a vehicle to move stuff from point A to point B, and hopefully there's somebody paying for it at the end of the trip. And that's what she was about. But specifically, in response to the American Civil War, the war had been raging for a year or two before somebody decided, well, that cotton is not coming from America anymore. Why does that matter? Because England major economy was all about making cotton and other fibers into usable products, like t-shirts. Well, they didn't have those, but you know what I'm talking about. They shipped manufactured textiles all over the world, and that was a big part of the English economy. So they really needed to continue getting those fibers from other sources during the Civil War, because the ports in the South were blocked by the Union Navy, and they just couldn't get much of it anymore. Of course, there was always a way around some of those blockades, but most of it was not available. So by the time that Euterpe was ready, the supplies that they had on hand were running out. So the timing was pretty good. So you'll notice the timing here. One of the things that most of our docents like to point out to sort of get you into the historical mode is that she was launched only 5 days prior to Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And we think of that as being a heck of a long time ago, because I don't know, not many of us were born then. There might be a few here. This picture was taken of a diorama that is aboard Star of India on the tween deck, and you can walk by that today. So the materials that were used to build the ship were sourced primarily from England and to a shipyard on the Isle of Man. Isle of Man is, we'll say that in a second. The shipyard there were probably employed somewhere between 600 to 800 workers. They were not all working on the same ship at the same time. The shipyard was owned by Gibson, McDonald, and Arnold. They didn't have any golden arches. The ship would not have been built except for it was on commission by a company called Wakefield National Company, who were operating out of Liverpool. They had not yet bought an iron ship. The shipyard had built only one iron ship prior to this one. So they had a little bit of experience. They were already retooled and ready to go. I'd like you to spot the anomaly in this picture. If you're looking very carefully at this picture, there is something there that would never have been there in the build on the Isle of Man. Did you pick it up? Well, there are no masts yet. But in the position of the foremast, there's a United States flag flying there, and I just don't think that was a good thing at the time. It's right above that dock. It's a little hard to see, I guess, in this picture.
So I read that actually, according to the newspaper article that covered it, there was an American flag flying on Euterpe when it was launched for some strange reason.
Most of the English were not siding with the Union during that time. And I think part of the reason for that was they couldn't get the cotton anymore. But if it was there, I wouldn't know about it. But I think it's an anomaly, but what do I know? Where's the Isle of Man? Well, it's sitting in the middle of the Irish Sea, surrounded by Northern Ireland, Wales, England, and Scotland. So, what is the Isle of Man? Well, she's a British Crown dependency. Very much like Bermuda is. She's an independent nation, but all of her defense is provided by the United Kingdom. So, a lot of people think she's part of England. They do not want to be called English. If you meet somebody from the Isle of Man, they are Manx. They are not English. They're not Welsh. They're not Irish. They're Manx. And well, that's right. They have no tails. It's amazing. All right. So the island itself is divided into 6 districts. If you look up here in the northeast, that is the town of Ramsey, the second biggest town on the island. That's where the Euterpe was built. Their symbol is on their flag, shown here. This is called a Triskelion. Their motto is something in Latin, which I will not try to pronounce, but it translates into English: wherever you throw it, it will stand. It is kind of a version of the sun symbol, otherwise sometimes known as a swastika in some cultures, which has kind of gone out of style since the 1940s, but they still use the 3-legged version in the Isle of Man. So I mentioned that Euterpe was the second iron vessel built there. Here's a list of the 5 iron vessels that were built at that shipyard. So they had some practice on a quite a bit smaller vessel to begin with, named it after the town for which it was built. They were, the first 4 were all shipwright. We'll let David Clark describe the difference between ships and barks. He's going to be doing that later. Just to know that they did have a little practice, and by the time they got to Euterpe, they finally knew how to do it, I guess. So they were able to build much larger ships after that. And a large ship means a lot. We'll talk a little bit more about size later. Size does matter. But here, we have a few symbols that I want to describe to you. This is looking at the starboard side, or the sunny side in the afternoon of Starvidia. These are probably similar to the original marks that she carried when Euterpe was first launched. So the one I want to point out first is the certification, or the registry marking. That's a circle with a horizontal line through it, and it says LR. That's not left and right. That's Lloyd's Registry. So that tells you that the ship was built under a certain set of rules and guidelines by the Lloyd's Registry. And if you built your ship per those guidelines, and that you were inspected at certain parts, certain phases along the way, then they would insure you. And other insurance companies would insure you as well, if they know that you built it per the regulations. Now there's another symbol right next to that called the plimsoll mark. Plimsoll mark shows, in this case, there are only 2 levels. Many plimsoll marks have more than 2 levels, but I'm just going to describe these 2 that are on our ship. The top one, FW, that's not forward. That is the load line, or the load limit, when she's sitting in fresh water. But the other line below that would be the load limit line when she's sitting in the water in the winter in the North Atlantic. So why the difference? Because salt water is heavier, or more dense than fresh water. Cold salt water can hold more salt, therefore be more dense. And your ship is going to ride higher in salt water than it will in fresh water. If you were to load this ship at the winter North Atlantic line and then sail into the Great Lakes, she would sink a little bit and come up to that other line. So you want to make sure that you're not overloaded, because the insurance company won't cover you if you are. The other thing you can look at is the port side and starboard side have these lines marked at the same level, and you can go around in your dinghy and look at the other side and make sure before you get on your voyage that you're not listing to one side or the other. Very easy to tell by looking at these marks. And the last mark I want to describe to you is that little horizontal line just above those other 2. That's a little bit below the shear line. That marks the level of the highest point you can load cargo, which is right up under the weather deck. And so your cargo loading space is from there and below. Your net tonnage is in that location. So we're going to talk about tons, and there's at least 3 different ways to describe that word. So I'm going to confuse you, and if you have any questions, ask Aaron, because he knows all about it.
I do.
All right, so at first, tons, you think of, oh, that's a weight of something. Yes. If you're going to measure the displacement of a ship, you put it in the water empty, except for its permanent ballast, that's also there. And it's going to push so much water out of the way. And if you calculate the weight of the water that has now been displaced, that's the displacement value, or light displacement of your ship. Now, if you're going to load that ship with cargo, there's a certain dead weight, and that pushes even more water out of the way, and that is the dead weight displacement. If you add those 2 numbers together, you get your total load displacement. That has absolutely nothing to do with the next tons I'm going to tell you. But that is the weight of water that is pushed out of the way in order for your ship to float. So far we understand tons as weight. All right. Now, tons as cargo. It has nothing to do with weight. Tons as cargo has to do with how many of these ton casks can you load into your ship below that line that I showed you, which is your cargo carrying capacity. When you load these ton casks aboard, you gotta make sure you got the right size. Those are 1,000 liters, or 1 cubic meter. Same thing, right? I know we don't do meters around here, but they did We measured in imperial tons for displacement and metric capacity tons for the cargo carrying load. So it's a little bit confusing. They're not the same thing. And when your typical tourist asks you about it, you might have trouble explaining it, and that's okay, so do I, right? If you look right here, the cargo carrying capacity of Euterpe was originally 1,197 and 1/100 of a ton. So you could put almost 1,200 of these size barrels on there. Now, that has to also account for that empty space between the barrels. Later on, they ignored that empty space because you got better at calculating the actual cargo space. And so a ton has changed from how many barrels you can put on there to the actual cargo carrying space capacity. So modern ships are listed in tons, and nobody's loading barrels on there to test how many they can fit. But that used to be the way it was done. Personally, if I'm going to carry something, I'm going to grab a firkin. But I can't lift anything heavier than that when it's loaded. All right, I confused you enough about tons. Let's move on.
Question for you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, you may or may not be able to.
I don't.
But, anyone who has or in past has owned a documented vessel, documentation certificate shows the tonnage of the vessel.
Correct.
But is that vessel weighed on land or actually displaced in water?
Neither. That's the cargo carrying capacity below the shear line or weather deck.
Pleasure boat? I don't think so.
Yes. Even though you're never going to carry cargo,
Right.
that's how we measure vessels.
No, that's, because it's contradictory sometimes with what your boat actually weighs, and you see this in the certificate, so I don't quite understand.
I don't know how much my boat weighs till the travel lift picks it up and tells us.
Exactly.
And then when it dries out, it's something different.
It's always more than what it says on the documentation.
Depends on the shape of your boat.
True.
Yeah. Anyway, how to build an iron ship, why to use iron to build a ship. Well, ships were built of wood, a lot, and they're very similar. However, you look over here on the left side, this is our San Salvador being built. And look over here, there's a diagram which is very much like the way Euterpe was built. And the similarities are a lot, and there's a few differences. Why would you want to build a ship of iron when you could build it of wood? Well, one thing, you really had a lot of trouble finding wood in the 1860s. The forests of England had been cut down to build ships. And the forests were generally gone. So,
I read years ago that 3,000 acres for one wooden ship.
it depends on the growth, and what kind of wood you're getting, yeah.
For a first rate ship.
So, the forests were generally gone, that's one thing. Also, if you build a ship larger than the ones you've been building, then what happens is wood is a little bit flexible. And as wood absorbs water, it's even more flexible. So you experience something called hogging, which is where the ends droop down, or you experience sagging, where the middle droops down. And this happens every time you go over a wave, and your ship isn't going to last much longer if it keeps flexing like this, as a lot of people who've seen wooden ships go down. So if you're going to build a much larger ship, you want something a lot stiffer. So if you use iron, yes.
You mentioned hogging, very good point. The surprise is hogged 18 inches to the center of the keel. And
Yeah.
that's why that's one of the big reasons.
That's one of the reasons we don't sail. So you're going to build a large iron ship. She's going to be a lot stiffer. The other advantage to iron is that for the same strength, you've got a much smaller piece of material than if you would if you use wood. So your frames and your stringers and your beams, they're all smaller. And instead of big, thick planks, you have thinner sheets on the outside of the hull. This gives you a lot more cargo space for an iron ship than you would have in the same size wooden ship. So that's a big advantage to building in iron. Now, how do you build in iron? Well, at the time, there wasn't a lot of welding technology going on. So you had to drill holes very specifically exactly where you wanted it in the two pieces that were being joined. And I've showed you a drill rig here. This is one example. This is the type you can stand on and crank. There's another type you can sit on. Some of the drills could be rotated to different angles, and some of them had drive joints in them that would actually push the drill in as you drilled. Some had to be moved manually. But this is the kind of thing you did. So imagine in the shipyard, there's guys who do drilling, and there's guys who sharpen the drills, and this is going on all day long. And there's no electric power yet, so we're doing everything by hand. Now you've got to put a rivet through these two holes. So imagine all this scaffolding erected all around the ship. There's a guy down here heating up a rivet. Now I'm going to have a rivet here that's a lot smaller than the ones you're going to see on Star of India. I should have said Euterpe. So this rivet is heated up. It's tossed up to the guy who's going to set it. And he's got a leather pouch that he catches it in, because he doesn't want to touch it, of course, it's red hot. And he grabs it with his tongs, and he knocks it in with a hammer, and then he holds it in place with the bucking bar. See a little indent there? And then he leans on that. And then there's a guy on the other side of the construction, and he's got the rivet set. Same little divot. The end of the rivet isn't formed yet. He puts it on there, holds it with his tongs because this gets hot too. And he hammers that down, and he forms the other side of the rivet. Okay? And then when all is said and done, you've got a construction with two pieces that are put together. Thanks to Captain James Thayer for these. You can pass these around if you want. I cleaned them. They're not that dirty anymore. So you can pass these around and play with those as I talk the rest of it. When that hot rivet is driven in there and the new head is formed, then it starts to cool. As the rivet cools, it draws the two plates even closer together as it shrinks. And you get a really good seal if you put the rivets close enough together. When you go aboard Star and you look at the rivets there, see how close together they are and how much bigger they are than the sample I'm passing around.
How many?
I don't think anyone's ever counted. There's a lot of rivets. Imagine the noise at the shipyard with dozens of teams of riveters and hammering away all the time, standing up on this rickety scaffolding, no OSHA to anywhere around. People are getting burned, people are falling off the raft. You gotta keep going, you gotta build the ship.
Were any of the rivet holes pre-formed with drop hammers, or were they all drilled in on site?
Don't know, wasn't there. Sir?
How long would you have to get this whole process, like, you get the rivet, how long does it take?
Again, I've never personally used a hot rivet, but I would run them the other direction. I don't know how long it takes to cool. So again, the benefits of iron is that you can actually put it together much quicker than wood. The pieces are malleable, you can bend them with a hammer and at some heat. You get a lot more rigid hull. Believe it or not, there's less maintenance because there aren't any worms eating your ship, things like that. And now you had really good places to mount your machinery if you're building a steamship. You can drill holes in that and you can mount things to it. It's a little more difficult to mount on wood. It cracks and breaks and rots away. Yes.
Is there a big difference in cost difference between wood and iron?
Probably because of the labor-intensive processes in building out of wood, I would think that yes, that it was probably cheaper to build an iron ship, although the materials might have been more costly. Maybe it was a wash, I'm not sure. Got a couple of models here that are in our collection. You can go see those. Both these models were steam and sail. So there was a transition period between the two technologies that lasted for almost 100 years. And now we're seeing some of these motor vessels revert back to sails. So that's really.
You can see the difference
welcome thing to
in the
see.
Great Eastern. Look at it, it's huge.
It is.
It's like a full-size cruiser or battleship.
It could not have been built with wood.
Yeah.
It would have been impossible.
There's pictures of how big it is, people next to it, and they really do look like ants.
It is huge. It was huge. All right, so to show you the difference between wood and iron and how popular it became, you can see here over the course of about 30 years how much tonnage of ships were built. This is in Britain only. You can see it changed from wood to iron. Iron and steel at the end. The picture over here, next page, shows you some of the riveting. This is an overhead deck beam. This is a frame. The stringers are just below there. I'm sorry, this picture doesn't have a stringer in it, but you can just see how many rivets there are. And depending on what you were joining and how many of those pieces you were joining together, whether there were 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 pieces being joined, you'd have to use different lengths of rivets, of course. And the more pieces you join, the more precise you have to be in the drilling of those pieces to make sure that the rivet would go all the way through. Sources for the different parts were over in England. We'll skip over this. There are marks that I challenge you to find during Ian's walkabout today. This is a mark from the frame. This is the LW Walker mark. They are there. I challenge you to find them. This is the Derwent constant iron mark. They built the overhead beams. And hull plates were made by a Brunswick foundry. All these marks are visible in very few places. Like, I don't know who took these pictures, but they might know where to find them. Oh, good luck. So as I said, the construction began near the beginning of the American Civil War because they knew that would be needed. There were watertight bulkheads installed approximately 20 feet from the bow and the stern. The complete bow watertight bulkhead is still there with only one door in it through to the access to the bosun's locker. The aft bulkhead has been partially removed in order to make room for lumber, should I say timber, to be loaded through the timber ports that were added for her third commercial career. And you'll see where it was cut away by a torch and nobody bothered cleaning it up, and you can walk right through that bulkhead now. Steam power was well established by the time that Euterpe was built. However, sailing ships still made up a majority of the cargo carrying capacity. Steamship was great if you wanted to keep a schedule, if you had perishable goods that had to get there right now, and you could almost guarantee a schedule. However, they had to stop a little more often in order to refuel and load water for oiling. A sailing ship was going to be a lot slower. You couldn't really guarantee delivery time, but she was going to continue on her voyage till she got there. No stopping necessary unless she needed repairs. So the competition between steam and sail was going on at the time. Believe it or not, you would often need fewer crew for your sailing ship than you would for a steamship. But you just need a lot more time, a little more food when you were going to be on a sailing ship. But there was a lot of competition between the two. Nobody knew at the time which technology was going to win. I don't think we still know. So again, a little part of the detail of the construction. You can see here is the keelson, which is a box made of iron over the keel. The keel is generally outside the ship, the keelson is inside the ship. Here's a beam holding up the deck above that. The 3 masts are set right onto the keelson. Here's some overhead beams, some frames, and this is the stringer and your watertight bulkhead. This will be a lot easier to see when you go aboard the ship. The plates are overlapping. It's a necessity because of the type of construction using the rivets. If you were to weld the edges together, then it would be a lot smoother. But they didn't have that technology at the time, so it had to overlap the plates. So what, from the outside, it looks like there's a really wide plate and a really thin plate and another wide one, etc. They are the same width, generally speaking. It's just that you see more of it from one side or the other. And if you'll notice, there are rows of double rivets right along each joint that follow along the stringers. And those rivets have been there since 1863. These are some specifications, some numbers, some of the things that you might be asked by some of your guests as you're walking around. You know, how big is it? And so these are different ways you can answer that question. A couple of these might be on your exam, but they're already in your reading materials. I won't go over these details, but these are the kinds of things that would be good to maybe memorize some of these numbers so you could answer those questions and be able to look like you know what you're talking about. The thing that I see most interesting is the bottom one. It cost 25,000 pounds to build this ship in 1863. What does that mean in today's money? That would be about 3.9 million British pounds today, which would equal approximately 5 million US dollars. Could you imagine building this ship today for only $5 million? So I don't know if materials were that much cheaper or if labor was just free, but I think if we were to rebuild this ship today, it might go to 10 times that. So let's not wreck the ship. We're not going to be able to build it up. Some of her original equipment, most of which is not there anymore. Her decking was originally pine and teak. Today, I believe it's Douglas fir. She had 3 capstans, none of which exist today. She now has 2 capstans, which are replacements. If you don't know what a capstan is, I'll be showing you that when we get on deck. She did have some passenger capacity from the get-go, even though she was a cargo ship. Back there in the aft end, they weren't configured exactly the same as you'll see them today, but there were some staterooms back there for a few passengers. She was a full ship rig. Again, Mr. Clark will tell you more about that. But her lower masts and her lowest yards were all made of riveted iron. Then her upper masts were made of wood. The deck house had a galley, which she still has, and space for 14 berths. There might be 3 or 4 berths there still now, and a lot of storage space. We're not going in there today because it's a giant mess. Someday I hope you get to go look into there and you'll say, I wish I didn't. The tween deck was originally ventilated with portholes, just in case we were going to use this ship for other than cargo. If we were going to haul some people around, we might as well make it ventilated. So the porthole covers that you see today are not original to the ship, but the holes themselves are mostly in the same place they were to start. She still has this windlass that's driven by the capstan above. You get to see that today. Come on, there we go. She also carried a evaporator, and that's the picture at the bottom. That was to make fresh water from salt water. Before they had reverse osmosis, they would simply boil the water into steam, collect that steam in the condensate, and store it in a tank on board. They could make about 100 gallons of fresh water a day if they kept the fire going. So yes, they would have to carry some fuel whether it be wood or coal, I don't know, but they would make fresh water. Now that was 100 gallons a day. They could store about 4,000 gallons, so they could start out good. That was almost enough to have a shower once a week in fresh water, but they probably never did that. They probably saved it for cooking and that sort of stuff. Also, these freeing ports are completely painted shut now. They will not be moving anytime soon. But in the old days, the idea was if the water came up to this level, it would just push the door open and free the deck of water. And if the scupper drains couldn't handle the load, these would take over. When we get into the saloon, you'll see a couple of skylight, a skylight above with a couple of stained glass windows. The aft end is here. This is the original from 1863, although I do believe that the pink color used to be a brighter red. This is Euterpe, the taller of the figures here. And the one below was reproduced while the reconstruction of the ship was being done in the 1960s here at San Diego. Somebody painted what was probably the original design, which is the coat of arms for the city of Liverpool in England. I believe a discussion needs to be had about whether or not to redo this window or leave it as is, where you can barely read the motto, which is again something in Latin I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it means God has given us leisure. So some of the survey dates, progress, as I said, Lloyd's had to certify the ship, so they would send an inspector out on a regular basis to make sure that the process was going as planned and that the ship would be safe when launched. The final certification of this date will come up later, January 5th, 1864. She was ready to sail. This is more about cotton and why they needed it. I'm going to skip over that right now. And the U.S. cotton exports to England grew rapidly over time. If you look at the Euterpe load of 3,090 bales, in 1800 there was only 2 shiploads, but by 1860 there was over 1,200 shiploads of cotton being shipped from the United States to England. It was very, very important to continue getting cotton from somewhere. So the imports of cotton, you can see that from America there was big numbers, from India there were much smaller numbers, but then during the war it turned around. After the war it turned back again. And so once you could get cotton from America, it was a much shorter trip, so you would want to do that. These are some of the ports, or all of the ports that she went to during her first 6 voyages to pick up cotton and jute and linseed and all these other kinds of things that she picked up. So the very first voyage started January 9th, 1864. What was the last date I talked about? She was certified for service on January 5th. So they started loading immediately, and only 5 days later she got underway. So that's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, people were standing there waiting for that ship to go. It was really that important that she built and used. Captain Story was the first commanding officer, and he managed to collide with an unlighted brig after just a few days at sea. This made the crew believe that the ship may have been cursed. They refused to do repairs. They said, "Get us off of here." So the ship put in over in Wales, and some of those crew were discharged and penalized by having to do 14 days hard labor, which in my opinion is probably not much of a penalty compared to having to serve on a cursed ship for months and months. So I think they took the 14 days willingly. They hired some new crew, and in May 1st, they arrived in Calcutta and offloaded whatever that cargo was that they brought to India, and unloaded a bunch of cotton and jute and a few other things, spices and whatnot. 11 months total, which is a pretty normally average time to do that sort of trip. Her second voyage, also again under Captain Story, they had a little bit of a problem after offloading in Calcutta. They were anchored offshore, and what we would call a hurricane showed up, and there wasn't time. You know, they didn't have all this forecasting. They don't really know when the storm is going to come. They just know that it is here now, and now we got to do something about it. Let's not run aground. So you'll see when we get over there how much time it takes to pull that anchor. They didn't have that kind of time. So they just let that anchor chain go, left the anchor on the bottom, sailed away, tried to get out of it, ended up breaking some parts anyway, tore the ship up pretty good, had a couple of stops in a couple of different places to do repairs, and were able to limp home on some new masts and a whole bunch of new rigging that got replaced right away when they got there. And the whole trip took 23 months. So that's almost 2 years. Most of that time was getting repairs done in a place where people just don't work very fast. When it's hot and you're in a humid environment, you can't expect your workers to do a heck of a lot. So they get back to England, and what do they got to do? They got to repair the repair. So thanks to Aaron here, I got a little bit of information about this. This is from the original January 5th, 1864 survey. I'll read this to you because it's a little hard to see. But it does say her masts, yards, etc. are of iron and good condition, sufficient size and length. So her original masts, as we learned before, are of iron. However, when she got back from her second voyage, and she did more repairs from all that hurricane damage, here's the survey before she could get underway for her third voyage. And it says, lifted the teak masts, introduced a new main and a new foremast of iron, a new mizzen mast of yellow pine. So the masts that we see here are iron, but they are not the original iron from her first launch. They are replacement after the second voyage. So that's something I learned well. Aaron sort of forced me to learn that. Thank you. But I did not know that before. So her third voyage, she got a new captain because that other captain died along the way, by the way. I think I failed to mention that. That happens. And so again, they ran into some foul storms off the Cape of Storms, which was renamed to Cape of Good Hope because more people would want to go there than a place called Cape of Storms. So, and it took her only 11 months, even though she was heavily laden and did quite a bit of damage. They were able to get that done in pretty much record time. Now, you'll notice that during the storm, they jettisoned 53 tons of chain and crew staples. No, they didn't have signature swing line staples. This is food and water that they threw overboard, plus at least one of their anchor chains. That's a big decision for a captain to throw an anchor chain overboard, but it's a lot of weight and they needed to lighten up the ship to get through the storm. But why would you have confidence enough to throw that off? If you thought you might need an anchor, well, there might have been a second anchor, most likely. Plus, they knew there were steam tugs waiting for them at Calcutta to take them 50 miles up the river to the city. So they knew that they would have that. The ship had been there a couple of times before, and they just knew that that was part of their regime. The fourth voyage, got a new captain now, Captain Kyle. For some reason, the logs showed that there were 2 pregnant passengers. I'm guessing they might have been women. So we had one crewman die of typhoid. I think that should probably be typhus, but I don't know. And she did a 16-month voyage that time So either the crew wasn't nearly as good, or the captain wanted to do a little sightseeing, or they just encountered some light wind. Fifth voyage, they got a new captain again. We keep doing that. Captain Cosens went to Bombay this time and Rangoon. There were some deaths, there were some people just wandered off, who knows why. This kind of stuff happens. And we did a little collision in the English Channel on the way home, and that was a 13-month voyage. And then her sixth and last voyage to India, we had Captain Cosens again. Apparently he didn't lose his job, even though there was a little collision. And on the way back home, he was signaled from another ship to go to France. I don't know how you believe in a signal like that, but it was. They raise a lot of flags and things, and they communicate with each other along the way. And it was because she had a new buyer. The ship was now being sold. Well, you got to think of it. This is already several years after the Civil War was over. Yes, we were still going to India. It might not have been quite as profitable. The owners were looking for a buyer because the trade to India wasn't nearly as profitable as it had been. Yes, Richard.
One thing that comes up is in 1869, the Suez Canal opened, and
steamships could make a lot quicker trip.
Yeah, steam vessels could do the canal, but sailing boats don't do canals real good. So that was one of the reasons one of the highly likely reasons for sail to Chusville.
So the outbound cargo was consigned right on the docks, and the only things in the logs are about how much space each person bought for that trip. There isn't a lot of information about exactly what kind of cargo it was that they were taking to India. It was likely manufactured goods and things that would support the colonists that were living there. But there's very detailed logs about what was loaded in India and taken to England. Probably because they didn't know exactly who was going to be buying it, so they had to have a really good inventory of what was on the ship in order to sell it properly. So those things are listed here. I had to look up a couple of these words. I don't know what's a chussum. Do you know what a chussum is? You do. It's the waste fiber that is produced when you're manufacturing silk. And apparently it has some uses similar to silk. Plumbago is probably growing in your backyard as a weed if you have a backyard. And the flower of that is used as a medicine. So there's a couple of words I had to look up because I didn't know what that was. So, my time is just about up. And she was sold to Shaw Saville and Company. And entering her second commercial career, you will hear all about that from Ian after the break.
Hey,
how's that? Is that better? Okay, right. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to cover 52 years, basically as picking up where David left off. I'm going to cover really three distinct periods. We're going to cover from essentially when the ship was making the global voyages, the 21 global voyages, which was the equivalent of going to the moon and back twice. So that's from 1871 to 1897. And then we're going to cover the Pacific Triangle, hauling of lumber, coal, and sugar. And then finally, we're going to talk about the Euterpe, its name changed to Star of India. We're going to cover it as a fishing support vessel. Now, the Docent manual is fantastic. It gives you a lot of information about what happened and when it happened. My presentation today is going to be a little different. I'm going to give you a lot of background stuff about why things happen. For example, why did they change the name from Euterpe to Star of India? My approach is going to be a little bit different too. We're going to go on a voyage together. We're going to get down into the nitty gritty. So you're going to get the National Enquirer version of Docent training today. Okay, we're going to talk about things like eating rats, getting drunk, stealing stuff. Okay? So, is that okay with you, Tom? Oh, yeah, good man. Okay, so anyway, that's what we're going to do. We're also going to go on a voyage together. We're going to be, part of the story will be you and I hope you've all eaten a lot of those nice brownies that Janice made. We're going to go on a voyage together. We're going to turn the clock back to 1874 and we're going to sail on this boat over here, which we'll visit later. We're going to sail to New Zealand. So, let me, what I'm using, by the way, for a lot of information is I'm using diaries, crew, and passengers. I'm using newspaper accounts and pretty much contemporary information to try and set the stage for you. And we have a lot of quotes from people that were there and what actually happened. Okay, let's get on with the next one. One of the first things that we find out when we talk about the global voyages, everybody goes, oh yeah, that's when they all sailed out to New Zealand and the Euterpe was full up to the brim with immigrants going to New Zealand. And the answer is, of the 21 voyages, 13, that's absolutely correct. But what about the other 9? We'll talk about those. And actually, in looking at the ship's logs, I did the same thing as David, I looked a lot at the ship's logs, we find a few things that actually don't quite jive with that. For example, we see in some of the voyages that the Euterpe didn't carry a lot of passengers. In fact, in some voyages it carried none. Another time, it carried munitions. We'll talk about that. Why is the Euterpe carrying munitions? It went to my hometown, Melbourne, Australia, 4 times. And finally, as David said, you have to remember that the Euterpe is a multi-purpose cargo carrier, and sometimes the cargo is human beings. We'll talk more about that. Okay, we're going to get into the why question. So let's go to our first why question. Okay, the 19th century is tremendous upheaval. The Industrial Revolution is causing your ancestors to come to the United States. You've got people traveling all over the world. You also have people immigrating to other parts of the British Empire. But the question is, okay, the Euterpe went to New Zealand, but why did it go to New Zealand specifically and not places like Australia or South Africa or Canada? Well, let's look at what's going on with New Zealand. Abel Tasman in the 17th century discovered New Zealand as a European, but he discovered that also that the locals were not particularly friendly. In fact, they wanted to eat him. The Maoris. Captain Cook also arrived in the late 18th century. Same situation. The natives weren't particularly friendly. And so what we find is that even as late as the early 20th century, no European powers claimed New Zealand, has annexed New Zealand, planted the flag and said, hey, this is now our country. What happened was that because there was nobody there, missionaries and private organizations started to go to New Zealand, and essentially the country was completely lawless. The British were concerned about this, and they said to the colony of New South Wales, which of course is Sydney's the capital of, they said, listen, you better go over there. The French are sniffing around, the Americans are sniffing around, get over there and essentially start negotiating with the Maoris and we'll set up this country. And as you know, New Zealand is about the size of California, consists of 2 islands, the North Island and the South Island. Well, what happened was that the colony of New Zealand was set up in 1840, and the idea was exactly that, to keep the Americans and the French out. Now, as you know from Dr. Ashley's talk, on the first night, there were no convicts in New Zealand. By the 1830s, the convict system was really starting to fall out of favor. What had happened, essentially, even in Australia, the colony of South Australia said, "Hey, we don't want convicts." Period. the colony of Victoria in 1850 said, hey, we don't want them either. New Zealand was the same way, although it's interesting, if you look at the convicts that were shipped out, turns out a lot of them were married men. And the researchers have found out that it was one of the few times in a man's life that they actually got to finish a sentence. So, I know, Sean is pink. Research also showed that a couple of blokes stole a calendar. Usually you were shipped out to the colonies that was 7 years, 14 years, or life. Well, these guys stole a calendar and both of them got 6 months. Anyway, you missed that one. All right. All right, enough of that. Okay, so who have we got as external threats? Well, it turns out that the Americans are wintering over in the Bay of Islands to avoid the cyclone season, and there's concern on the part of the British. Hey, the Americans, they've already tried to take over Canada in the War of 1812. They may have some ideas of taking over New Zealand. Also, if you see in this picture here, there's some of the whaling ships. Not only were American whaling ships, but they're also French, which we'll talk about. If you're wondering what is that building on the right there, that's Bishop Pompalier's house in Russell. Russell was seen as the hellhole of the Pacific. In other words, it was completely crazy and lawless. And that was one of the reasons why the British wanted to come there. But the real concern for the British was their bête noire, the French. Okay. The French basically tried to do an end run. You ever gone to Costco on a really busy day and you're sitting there and you're waiting, you've got your blinker on and you're waiting for the person to pull out and you're just about to pull in and some other character grabs the spot? Well, that's what the French tried to do to the British. The British were systematically going through with the tribes in the North Island, negotiating a treaty, and saying, hey, we want to have settlements here and we want to negotiate with you. The French said, oh, you know what? They're in the North Island. Why don't we just bypass them? We'll go to the South Island and set up a settlement in the South Island. Well, they were fighting words for the French. For the British. The ship that was sailing out from France was going to just south of Christchurch. It's called the Banks Peninsula, and the place was called Ankara. What happened was that the British got wind of it, sent a warship, and as the French ship arrived, here's a British warship, lots of Union Jacks flying. The British said to the French, oh, you're welcome, but guess what? This is our place. We've annexed it. You're welcome to stay. You can build your nice French cottages. You can call the streets Rue Lavard, whatnot, but you're under British rule. So that kept the French out. In the meantime, the British are negotiating with the Maoris, and in 1840 they have the Treaty of Waitangi. And that really establishes the framework for the British annexing and taking over New Zealand. The problem is that the colonists, just like they did with other indigenous people in other countries, they get a little greedy and decide, oh, we like this land here, and we'll just take that from the Maoris. Well, the old expression we're all hearing today, fool around and find out. Well, the British found out the hard way. They discovered, and you've all seen the haka, they discovered they ran into a pretty tough crowd. The Maoris were very adept at building palisades. They were very adept at close-in fighting. And they fought the British to a standstill several times. In fact, to the point where, and we'll talk about a ship, the American Confederate raid on the Shenandoah, to David's earlier point, a lot of these ships were used as transport carriers, and in fact the Shenandoah, when it was a sea king, brought troops from Britain to try to help suppress the Maoris. But anyway, the British were really struggling, fighting against the Maoris. So that brings us to the suppression strategy. So what do you do if you're going to try to change the balance of the equation as far as getting the country peaceful? Well, this is where we start to look at the idea of transporting people out to New Zealand. What do? Well, you bring out immigrant families, that increases the population, it increases the number of pakeha, as they're called, the white people. You expand economic development, and you change the population mix in favor of the settlers. And you have to remember, this is the 19th century, 1870. There's tremendous upheaval in Britain. You've got all of this rapid industrialization, a lot of dislocation. You've got larger family size. In Scotland, you've got land consolidation because they've come up with a sheep called the Cheviot that they can run on this land that was fairly marginally before. And you also got depressions in England that make more of an incentive for people to leave. You also have to remember that there's no safety nets in Britain. If you run out of money, the older boys are going to go work on the land, the girls are going to become maids, the little kids are going to end up in orphanages. So it's really tough going. So there's quite an incentive to come out. All right, so what happens next? Well, this is part of the suppression strategy. We'll suppress the Maoris by bringing out these people, and we'll pay people or encourage them to come out to New Zealand. And these are two of the ads, the two of the settlements. These are these private settlements that are just being set up. And these ads are actually very illustrative. Let me talk about the left-hand side one first. Okay. They're not interested in the huddled masses yearning to be free. Hey, we don't want unskilled people. We want skilled people. They talk about they want mechanics. They want shepherds. They want miners. They're also going to check on you. They want to know you're a good citizen, and they're going to make sure you've got the qualifications, and also that you're a reputable individual. The other thing that they point out is married men and women, maximum age 40. Single men and women, 30. So the immigrants to New Zealand are relatively young. Grandma and grandpa aren't going. Okay? All right. The one on the right-hand side has some very interesting information in it. Basically, and I'll try to paraphrase it. They talk about, hey, we basically want you to come out. We're even willing to give you a farm, but guess what? We don't want any of you gentlemen, slackers, that claim that you're sort of like nobility to come out. And they haven't ever said young men in the rank of gentlemen who have not been brought up in any professional business or and without sufficient capital to establish themselves and employ labor, guess what? They're not getting the farm. We don't want you. We're not going to have you essentially come out and just be trying to mooch off the system. So, well, we've got talent. We're looking. So let's have a look at. If we look at the immigrants coming to New Zealand, there's a great quote that says, and this is true for your ancestors coming into the United States. People either decided to leave or they decided to stay. And here's a picture. We've got people getting on board on the left-hand side there, and then the final destination, and that's Port Chalmers, which is the port for Dunedin. And this is the voyage. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to put on your caps. We're going to get into the transporter just like in Star Trek, and we're going back to 1874. This is you. There you are, your husband and wife, and as David pointed out to me, there's a little baby there actually tucked away. And you can see on this ship, this picture is a very famous painting, The Last of England's very sentimental shot of immigrants leaving, obviously, to go overseas. Let me ask one of our docent trainees, what do you think that look on their face? How would you describe that look?
Apprehensive.
Sorry?
Apprehensive.
Apprehensive, absolutely. No, it's like, oh my God, what have we got ourselves into, right? And you're absolutely right. There's hope, but there's also a lot of apprehension. And why is that so? If I can turn that down. Well, you know, yeah, they're driven by hope and apprehension. Hey, we don't know what we're getting into, but we hope we'll be able to have a better life. Just like your ancestors coming here, same sort of motivations. These people have burnt their bridges. You know, they're getting on a ship, same one we're going to go on in a few minutes, and they're sailing for 12,000 miles non-stop. You're not getting off. You go, hey, hang on, I changed my mind. Can I get off? No. You're going to New Zealand whether you like it or not. Most of these people have never been more than 50 miles. This is huge. This is like you and I go to the moon. And you know, the sad thing is, they're leaving what's familiar to them. You're leaving your elderly parents. You're leaving friends. You're leaving your pets. You know, I mean, mundane things like that. But you know, you're really making a tremendous break. And why are you doing all this? Well, you're going to another country, and it's, you know, it's the other side of the earth, strange people, strange land, but you're hoping that, you know, you'll do better than your parents did. Just the classic immigrant story, that you're going to go there, you're going to you'll get an opportunity to get some land and be successful. And a bit like the US, the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness is sort of similar aspirations for these immigrants as well. Okay, we're going on our voyage. Who's coming along with us? Well, it turns out we're on probably the most populous of all the voyages. When you go over there, there'll be about 40 or 50 of us. I want you to imagine that down on the tween decks, when David and I are down there, there's 10 times as many of us. Here's our voyage. Here's a typical breakdown of the manifest. You can see here roughly men and women about the same numbers. Young boys and girls about you know, similar numbers, and then you've got about 17 infants. But I want you to pay attention to this next picture. This is the one I want you to get in your head. This is what it's going to be like, Dad. You know, that's what 410 people on the tween decks would look like. And you can see you've got to be a pretty hardy soul to make this 3 to 4 month trip out to New Zealand. So just keep that picture in your head. That's us on board with all the other 400 odd people that are coming along with us. Okay. Now I want to go on to, and you can see I want you to suspend your 21st century sensibilities. We're not on the Princess Cruise Line. This, as we can see here, this is some of the comments about what it was like to go out, and I'd like to unpack each one of these real quickly for you. Okay, occasionally dangerous weather. We're going from the UK, we're sailing down the African coast, we're going to go through the doldrums. So we're going to have periods where the ship is just laying there languidly, not moving. It's hot as hell down below because you're basically down below decks. We're going to sail down and we're going to go to 47 degrees south. That's the roaring 40s, almost the howling 50s. And then we're going to run east. We've got huge seas following us because remember, there's huge fetch. There's no land mass. And so we've got waves the size of a tennis court following us. The ship potentially could pitch pole, it could go down a wave and keep going, sort of like crash dive. Or it could be spun around on its beam ends and rolled over. So, you know, there is the potential that the ship could founder and you know, everybody would be lost. And you can see here, one of our fellow passengers has made a comment. Very strong breeze, very heavy seas running. The waves are like mountains coming over her in tons. So what we find out is that the Euterpe is slow and it's wet, but it's very strong, which is good. Okay, constant noise. You've got people shouting orders, you've got sails flapping, you've got waves banging up against the iron hull, you've got kids crying, you've got people arguing. I mean, it is just a cacophony of noise 24/7. Dampness. You've got condensation on the iron plates. And you're wearing cotton, and there's an I know a lot of you guys are outdoor guys, you know the old adage, cotton kills, you know, you never really get cotton dry. So you've got dampness all the time. You know, you've got people here that have never been to sea, and even those that do go to sea, you're going to have sea sickness and whatnot until people get used to being at sea. And as a result of that, the place is going to be pretty smelly. You got a lot of foreign people, you got bathrooms, you got people sick, Not exactly, like we said before, Princess Cruise Lines. You got minimal privacy. You saw that shot before. We'll just go back for a second. You're all jammed in there. You may have a nice little camera screen, but that's about it. You know, your neighbors are right on top of you, and so there's minimal privacy. Did I go too far? Go back one. There we go. Poor hygienic conditions. We'll talk about that because one of the things the British were very, very sensitive about, which is outbreaks of typhus on the ship. We'll talk about that because that did happen and a lot of passengers died because they had no antibiotics, and if something like typhus broke out, it just went through the whole ship. But it is poor hygienic conditions with all those people there. You got clothes because you're wearing primarily wool and cotton. Sometimes they're wet, sometimes they're itchy, definitely itchy, and also sweat. The food we'll talk more about, but it's not exactly, you know, the Ritz-Carlton. It's bland, it's marginally nutritious. You do have some medical help. It's about the equivalent of the Civil War level of medical knowledge. It's okay for setting bones, it's okay for amputating, limbs, a little bit of basic stuff, delivering children, but it's not, there's nothing very sophisticated. And then finally, you're in a bubble. You don't know what's going on in the rest of the world for 3 to 4 months. All right. So, okay, who are the typical immigrants that are coming out to New Zealand? Well, as we said before, they're not the usual immigrants, they're skilled labourers. And also they're not typical where usually the men go first and the women come and the kids come out later. In this case, they're intact families that are being asked to come out. Our voyage has got 410, that was the most, but there were several voyages that were quite crowded. But the good news is, despite the fact that the ship does have a lot of people on board, very low incidences of accidents or deaths. And the passengers hold, as it turns out, the captain is hand selected by Mr. Saville of the Saville line, and he picks experienced and competent captains and also the mates. And so the passengers have when you read the diaries, they have very high opinions of the crew and the captain. The other thing, you do have some onboard medical help, and then finally we have some regulations. We'll talk about those regulations because the British brought those in to try to save the immigrants from things like typhus and also making sure that they had enough food. So, how long does it take to get to New Zealand? Sorry, I can't even see my writing. Okay. What happened in the case of the immigrants, they could go to places in England ahead of time. They could see what it would look like to go, to be in a bunk and whatnot, and so they would buy the bedding and things ahead of time. The accommodation was built, and when they got to New Zealand, essentially it was all knocked down, and the timber was sold off, and of course the ship was loaded up with whatever they could take back to England and sell. Now, important thing, there is, as David pointed out, even though they have a condenser, there's a real shortage of water. If you want to wash, you're going to wash everything in salt water, and the fresh water is strictly for drinking and cooking, and so a real shortage of water. How long does it take? Well, it turns out we're on the slowest ship on the run. It's going to take 3 to 4 months, and no voyage less than 20 days. Now, you'll notice that the ship is running from London to Glasgow. London or Glasgow to New Zealand. One of the things I didn't realize was if it's sailing from Glasgow, there's an added complication. Many of the people, even in the 1870s and 1880s, the Highland Scots, they don't speak English. They speak Gaelic. So that makes it even more complicated. All right. There's no forced ventilation, and even as late as the 1890s, shore sail will never bother to put refrigeration or real forced air in, and so it's pretty hard going. There's no mechanical power on board, and there's only kerosene for lamps and running lights. Okay, so how's the accommodation? Well, we find out that in first class, just like which is under the quarterdeck, you've got the first mate, the captain, and what they call the cabin class passengers. It's costing about $52 to $78 to do that. They get added advantages of various things where they, primarily when it comes to food, we'll talk about that. The second class passengers are aft, in cabins aft, and then finally, the one that is fairly typical is this one here. This is steerage, and you can see this is a lithograph of the first voyage of immigrant ships to New Zealand. And when we go over, you'll see that the museum's done a good job of replicating this type of arrangement where you've got communal eating, and then you've got all of these bunks. And they set it up in such a way you can see that the steerage passengers had to take care of themselves as far as cleaning their accommodation and getting meals from the galley. All right. One of the things that the superintendent did was it was responsible not only for the medical health of the passengers, but also the social health, the social well-being of the passengers. And so they went to a lot of trouble to make sure that people didn't get bored. They organized classes for the kids. They had a handwritten newsletter. They had a lot of sports events. They were encouraged, and this is where we get a lot of our information, to keep diaries, white letters, etc. We had the diaries of a son, dad and a son, who were carpenters, and they were allowed to work with the ship's carpenter and help repair things and things like that. Church service on Sunday. Now this one here performed regular airing of the living quarters. The British were really concerned about outbreaks of typhus. And so they spent a lot of time trying to make sure, okay, we want people to try to keep the living areas clean. We want to be able to wash the clothes and things like that. Most of the time, everybody was below decks, but they would allow them out in small batches, as you can see. The first class passengers, on the other hand, they get, as David will show you, they get to sit on the seats that are next to the saloon skylight. All right, food. All the cooking is done in the cookhouse where the pantry is. There was very little fresh food because there's no refrigeration. And but the first class passengers did have, and you'll see it when we go over on board. There's a little pantry there, a little area, serving area for the first class passengers, and they had a steward. Okay, we talked about regulations. Well, the British came up with a thing called the scale of dietary. That says, all right, if you're going to take immigrants out to New Zealand, then we need you to have X amount of food, this type of food. And here's two examples. 21 quarts, that's a little over 5 gallons a week of drinking water per adult. And then the only things really available to do something about the taste of the food were salt and sugar, and a pound of sugar. So you got plenty of sugar to help sweeten things up. The problem that we run into, and we'll talk about just as it relates to the rats, is that it's all very well to say, well, you know, we're going to have this amount of food, and the ship might say, right, we're budgeting for, let's say, 12 weeks. Well, what happens if it takes 15 weeks? You start running out of food. We see that. The first class passengers, just like first class passengers anywhere, they get the choice of fresh meats because there were certain animals that were kept on board. There were chickens on board for eggs. The second class passengers typically got canned meats as well as other staples, and then the poor old third class passengers, they essentially got the same as the crew, staples and salted meats. So how was the food? Well, let's look at our voyage. Well, it turned out that we found sock. You know, there's nothing like a men's sock to give a little soup, a little tangy flavor. And the next one is really illustrative. Here's the longest voyage of the Euterpe. They ran out of food and they're hunting rats. Okay, so you're cooking up a rat pie. So this is the, like I said, the National Enquirer version of the Docent train. Right, well, you know what? Speaking of National Enquirer, we're not dealing with angels here. We're dealing with people that are just like us. They've got all sorts of things that they do. And we have the problem of what do you do about working men, particularly, that are sitting around bored for 4 months? They got nothing to do. Well, it's the potential for drunkenness, fights, and thefts. Let's talk about something near and dear to my heart, alcohol. Okay. The only people that we're allowing to drink spirits are the first class passengers, because we know that first class passengers, they're couth and they can handle their liquor. We can't have the steerage people drinking spirits, that's for sure. The liquor is the quantity and the type of liquor made available. The captain determines that. But it can be purchased, and even the steerage passengers do have limited access to alcohol. And once again, of course, you can always bribe somebody to get more. So what happened? Well, we see people doing things like selling their clothes to buy alcohol. But I love this last quote. Here they are, they must be in the doldrums somewhere. Christmas night was a jolly spree. The sailors, the saloon passengers, and the second-class passengers were all about drunk. But the captain was quite sober, thank God. We, our group, in steerage, in third class, are all sober in third class. We only had, or were allowed, 2 bottles of wine. So they're sober because they only got a limited amount of alcohol. So, all right. What about things getting stolen? Well, the mate was tasked by the captain to go investigate. They would search people's luggage to try and find out what was going on. They'd interrogate people. But there's no brig on the Euterpe. They would bind people over to a magistrate in the colonies for a trial and punishment. And what happened? Well, as we can see here, an immigrant from the Euterpe stole, in fact, I was looking for my watch, in fact, everybody got my watch? Yeah, you can see, got 6 months for stealing somebody's watch, and another person in steerage was convicted for stealing milk. Okay, right. What about the typical voyages? Of the 13 and the 21, they went to New Zealand primarily, mainly to Dunedin, and then all of you that speak Gaelic know that Dunedin means New Edinburgh, but they went to other ports. How about our voyage? How did we go? Well, guess what? We arrived, it took us 124 days, and the reason being is the condenser. Remember David talked about the condenser? Well, this is how critical it was to have water. We had to pull into Cape Town and we had to get the condenser repaired, but we all made it. But here again, most of the casualties, fatalities, are among the little kids, unfortunately. But we had 6 births and two kids died. Yes?
Also, the doctor on board got a little stipend for everybody who came into New Zealand healthy.
That's true. Yeah, they part of their reward program was, hey, you know, you're supposed to get them there in good physical health. All right. So we've gone to New Zealand. What we find with these people, they're going out, they have these aspirations, and New Zealand becomes a real trendsetter in terms of implementing a lot of Victorian era aspirations. For example, because they never really defeated the Maoris conclusively, they set up the Maori land courts to give them back the money, but also you could see they came up with a national education system, and then for you ladies, New Zealand, the first nation in the world to give women the right to vote. Yeah. Also, first country in the world to come up with an old age pension and the 8-hour work week. But we find out that as we look at their logs, hey, there's 9 of these voyages that are not typical. And you can see the first voyage, for example, is going out to Melbourne. And I want to draw your attention to the ones that are highlighted, and particularly the voyages of the 1887 and the 1890. And it raises another question: why is the Euterpe carrying munitions? Well, we find out that we're going to Melbourne. What? In fact, Euterpe made 4 voyages to Melbourne. Well, as it turns out, Melbourne in the late 19th century, it's called Marvellous Melbourne. It's one of the most important cities in the British Empire. And you can see some of the examples of the architecture there. And the reason why it's called Marvellous Melbourne is because, guess what? The next big gold rush after California is in the colony of Victoria, which Melbourne is the capital of. They are rolling in money. They've got a ton of money. Everybody's gone off to the gold fields, just like they did here. And as a consequence, they've left Melbourne largely undefended, despite the fact that it's got a ton of money. Well, that leads us to the next character. And this is a character, a ship, that has a lot of ties to this museum. January 1865. Oh my God, this is Melbourne, Australia. What is a Confederate commerce raider doing in Melbourne? Well, it's there because it's short on crew, it's short on ammunition, it's short on food, it's got a damaged propeller shaft, and also it's leaking. They sail up, literally, if you can imagine somebody sailing up, they sail up within point-blank range of downtown Melbourne, drop the anchor and go, hi guys, we're here. Well, it causes a huge furor. First of all, it shows just how vulnerable Melbourne is, because this ship that has 8-inch guns is literally within point-blank range of downtown Melbourne. The populace in Melbourne is polarized. Do we support the South or do we support the North? The Union Consul is screaming blue murder, saying you've got to impound the ship. Captain Waddell, the skipper of the Shenandoah, opens the ship up to all the locals. Thousands of them come to see it, and it's it. Anyway, but what really gets everybody fired up is that Captain Waddell, they find out that, hey, that Captain Waddell is recruiting Australians to join the Confederate Navy. That's in violation of the British Neutrality Act. The government sends police first. Captain Waddell says, you're not coming aboard. He says, okay. They send the military. Captain Waddell says, you try and board my ship, I'm going to start firing on you in a very nice city. I don't want to do that, but that's what I'm going to do. Well, the Cerberus finally gets fixed up and leaves, but that scares the locals. Hey, we've got to get better defense. They go out and they buy themselves the Zumwalt of the day. And you can see how, and it's a lemon like the Zumwalt. I apologize to the US Navy. It's on low freeboard, you can see it rolls, and it's dangerous as hell, and it's not particularly effective. But they get lulled into a false sense of security. Then the next thing happens is the Russian Pacific Fleet arrives. Oh my God, the Russians. And here's a picture from the newspaper at the time. There's a ship called the Africa, and they're talking about how dangerous it is. Ironically, the Africa was built for the Russians in an American yard. But it gets the Australians' attention, but what really gets their attention is the next thing. There's a rumor going around, hey, the Russians are here and they're going to bombard all the major cities unless we pay them a lot of money. And guess what? The city that they think is the best one to bombard and hold for ransom is Melbourne. Well, that really gets everybody spun up. So what do? Melbourne goes from one of the most undefended ports in 1865 to the most defended port in the Southern Hemisphere. They build a coastal defense, they build a couple of forts, and here's where the Euterpe comes in. The 1887 voyage, the 1890 voyage, the gunpowder that it carried, that was its only cargo, is for these forts to help defend Melbourne. So that's the tie there. All right. What happens? Eventually, as the words of one of the crew, hey, we got to Dunedin, and they're selling the Euterpe off. And they did. By this time, just as David mentioned before, the Euterpe is now 30 odd years old. It's well over its usual lifespan, and so also that the immigrants can come out faster on steamships. But here's the most telling thing, that comment at the bottom. 1875. The longest voyage from Great Britain during this year was the Euterpe, 125 days. To make amends, the steamship Arado did it in half the time. So you can see even as early as 1875, sailing ships are on the way out. So that ends that. Any questions about the global voyages? Sorry, I'm running a little behind the schedule, so I'll try to speed up. Okay, so what happens next? It gets sold off, and now we're looking at what they call the Pacific Triangles phase. I have to tell you, the behind the scenes stuff is that there's a lot of political and legal maneuvering, more so than sailing the ship. And it raises some questions. Hey, how come the Euterpe ends up as a carrier for 3 different nations in literally 3 years? And then how did the Euterpe go from being a British ship to an American ship? Well, let's look. The Republic of Hawaii. The British had pulled out of the Sandwich Islands, Hawaii, turned it back to the Hawaiian monarchy. The settlers don't like that. Dole and other people decide, you know what? We can run this better than the locals. Let's take it over. The US supports basically a coup d'etat, and the Republic of Hawaii is formed essentially by the coup plotters. Their idea is, hey, we don't want to really be an independent country. We want the US to take us over. We want them to annex us. We get to the next phase, which is called, Jerry Mullen calls the dubious Hawaiian. This is where we get some legal wheeling and dealing. Some smart businessmen in San Francisco find out, oh, you know what? A bit like the way that the US Coast Guard got the Eagle, which was originally a German sailing ship, a horse vessel, it was a war reparation. They had the same idea. Hey, you know what? If we take over another country, we get all their ships. And guess what? If we register these ships in the Republic of Hawaii and the US takes over Hawaii, hey, we bootleg our way in, we get all our ships under the US registry. And this Howley, who pretends to be a Hawaiian, Lincoln Spencer, he buys 3 ships, one of which is the Euterpe, and tries to put them on the Hawaiian Republic of Hawaii registry. Well, you can see it takes a long time. The Republic is not real happy about that. Even though they buy it in July 2nd, 1898, it takes almost a year before the Supreme Court of the Republic agrees to that. But they do get on there, as do several other ships, and one of those ships is the Fall of Clyde. And Dan quite rightly pointed this out to me a few years ago. The Fall of Clyde is still around. The Scottish Maritime Museum wanted to buy it. Unfortunately, the Port of Honolulu and the Bishop's Museum in Hawaii, quite frankly, I don't know, they really dropped the ball on this. They want to tow it out to sea and scuttle it. We got a spot where the B-39 was, so we can do a little whip around later on, $35 million, we can buy it. That was the last price. But unfortunately, they think it might be too far gone to save, which is unfortunate. Okay, so what happens? Well, the two plotters, the Republic of Hawaii people, get their wish. President McKinley says we're annexing Hawaii, we're going to make it a U.S. territory, and all of those ships, up to a certain period, they're going to now become U.S. ships. The problem is that the American yards and unions realize, hey, this is a plot. They're just sneaking these ships in and getting them re-registered as American ships. They put pressure on McKinley and it stops. But the good news is, and I'll just cut to it, Congress makes an honest one with the Euterpe because it was bought and put on the Republic of Hawaii registry in July 1898. It does make the grade and it becomes an American registered ship. You'll notice that the first thing it says it sailed, the Euterpe sailed basically stateless. No other country's recognizing the Republic of Hawaii. No other country's going to provide insurance for the Republic of Hawaii ship. So the Euterpe does sail pretty much as a stateless ship. But there is a niche, yes.
So, something I'm wondering about, at this time, so was it difficult to just register a ship in the United States? Was there somehow a reason why they couldn't just register in the United States in whatever normal way there was?
Well, I think they were trying to sort of bootleg them in because they were getting them cheap and they were just looking as a way. But the unions obviously wanted the ships built in the United States. They wanted American-built ships. This was a way of getting a cheap foreign ship in on the registry. Which,
so they wouldn't allow you to change it? Is that like there was no way to just...
I'm not particularly sure. I just know that this was a way that they could sort of get these ones in.
Yeah, Ian, if I can jump in. As far as my understanding goes, the two ways that you can have a ship under American registry is number one, you have it built in America, right?
Yep.
And the second one, where you can get a foreign-built ship put onto American registry, you have to replace a majority of its materials with American materials and American labor.
Okay.
40% value in reconstruction in the U.S.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right.
A lot of this has to do also with insurance.
Yeah.
Where you're registered, how you get your insurance for international trade.
Yep. Thank you. Okay. When we go on board, you'll see that we're now getting into. We'll go back to this one. There is a niche, as we see here. And this is really what the Euterpe was doing. It's carrying lumber from the U.S. out to Australia. And even today, if you go to Bunnings, which is like the Home Depot equivalent in Australia, if you want Douglas fir, it's called Oregon. They were bringing coal from Eastern Australia back to Honolulu. One of the Docent trainees, why would they be bringing coal from Australia to Honolulu?
Pretty simple.
Yep, fuel for steamships, but also this wonderful new invention called electricity, and you got to have coal for the power plant, and then finally sugar back to the mainland. So that was the triangle. The Euterpe, David talked about. At this point, this is also when they cut portholes in the back of the stern of the ship to be able to put the logs in. They really only did 3 voyages in this period, and in January, the ship, when it's on its way to Melbourne, is sold to the Alaskan Packers Association. Euterpe is running out of 9 lives. It runs aground. It's stranded on a reef, and also it has a reputation for being tender. And there's a potential, if the cargo moves, that it could capsize. But it survives, and the next thing, oops, did I lose something? Oh, there we go. It gets sold, and it becomes a conversion to a, version of Rick. Okay, so what happens is, it now enters its third stage. It's now going to be a fishing support vessel, and it's gone into a yard in San Francisco, and you can see, we'll see a model when we go over on the ship of the changes that are made to it. They changed the rig, and why they changed it to a bark rig? Well, the fishermen are doing double duty. They're working also as a seaman on the way up. It's the removal of the iron mast section and replacing with wood makes it lighter in the stern, so they can build it out. They can put more accommodation in the back. The bark rig is a lot easier to maneuver, and basically that's the reason why they changed it. This gets us to the last phase. Last 20 years, the Euterpe is a fishing support vessel, which raises a question, hey, how come a bunch of fish canneries, why did they end up with one of the largest sailing ship fleets in the US in the early 20th century? And then the other question, of course, is why did they change the name of the Euterpe? So let's have a look. Well, what happened was that the Alaska Packers Association, in 1892, these small canneries decided, hey, you know what? We want to control the price of canned salmon. The way we'll do that is we'll get together and we'll regulate the supply of it. That's what they do. And they consolidated all of these little canneries all over Alaska. Here's one of them. This is the one at Bristol Bay, which the Euterpe visited several times. The APA turns out to be regarded a bit by the locals as fairly ruthless. They pretty much control a lot of what's going on in Alaska. They have a lot of political power, but they did, a bit like the company store, they did help the local population, particularly during the pandemic. So how does the APA get involved with sailing ships? Well, sailing ships are cheap, they're easy to convert, and so APA says, right, they went to the James Corey in Belfast, and they bought a bunch of ships that were all named Star. And the simple answer to why did they change the name from Euterpe to Star of India is that the APA liked the name Star. So everything became Star. And so as a consequence, in 1906, Euterpe became Star of India. This is the fleet as late as 1920. They had 32 ships at one stage, and even in 1927, they still had 14, and of which unfortunately only 2 survived, one of which we're going to go on board in a minute, the Star of India, and the other one is the Belclutha, formerly the Star of Alaska, which is at the San Francisco Maritime Museum. What do they use the Star for? As you can see, they're backwinding the main here, but it's out as a support vessel for the fishing dories out there while it's fishing. And you can see, basically they had about 200 people. They changed, we'll look at a model over there, they changed all the accommodation to accommodate these 200 cannery workers and fishermen. The crew is very multinational, and as a consequence they even added extra galleys in. And it was good money. You could make $400 to $500, $600 for 4 months' work, which was considered good money back then. But once again, the Star is living on borrowed time. It gets itself, in this case, another one of its 9 lives is used. It's trapped in the ice for about 17 days, but fortunately it survives. And then finally, in 1923, it comes back with its last cargo of salmon, and then, of course, it's been towed over to Alameda and left. And as we know from Margaret's presentation, it gets picked up by the Zoological Society. Any final questions? Yes?
So how are they dealing with scurvy then? In the inventory, the inventory?
Well, they already had a good idea, even as early as James Cook's 100 years earlier. They knew that limes, that sauerkraut, that various things like that were able to deal with scurvy. And so they made sure that they had, part of the provisions they had on board were things that were able to fight scurvy. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Bob, do you have any comments?
The last things that Ian was talking about was the Alaska Packers Association. And I wanted to remind the docent trainees specifically that we have on our website an actual YouTube of the Alaska Packers Association video. It's the same one that we have in between decks, but you're able to access it in the comfort of your own home and see a lot of this that we talked about on that. We also have another one on there related to the start Indian and sailing, but that's what we're going to talk about next week.
Okay.